Okay, so picture this. Four highly successful software developers land absolute top-tier jobs in the booming tech hub of Gurgaon. We're talking big salaries, big dreams, the whole shebang. So, to celebrate, they decide to move into this stunning luxury penthouse. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate success story, right? But what if I told you that this dream move unraveled, and I mean rapidly unraveled, into a deadly, haunted nightmare that would literally cost one of them his life? Today, we're diving into an explainer of a deeply disturbing source account. And honestly, it proves that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't just hiding in the dark. We actually invite them in through our own arrogance. Now, what's really wild about this setup is the sheer scale of the illusion. 14 crores. That's right, a staggering 140 million rupees. That was the estimated valuation of this ultra-modern cyber hub penthouse they moved into. We are talking the absolute pinnacle of modern luxury. Sleek glass, cold steel, the works. But, as our source material reveals, that massive price tag was completely masking an ancient primal evil lurking inside. It's a really chilling contrast, honestly. It just goes to show that literally no amount of modern wealth, or cutting-edge technology for that matter, can protect you from a supernatural threat that just completely defies logic. And the geographical setup of this flat, well, this is where things get incredibly eerie. So they were living way up on the 50th floor, literally up in the clouds. But directly beneath them, the 49th, 48th, 47th, and 46th floors were completely desolate. Just four completely empty, pitch-black, unoccupied floors. The real estate agents were apparently struggling to fill them, which ended up creating this massive buffer of dead space between our four developers and, well, the rest of the inhabited world. They were completely isolated, floating in the sky, with just absolute silence below them. Or, at least they thought it was silence. So the really crucial point here is how this haunting escalated, because it didn't just start with flying objects right out of the gate. It started with impossible sounds. During the first few days, the guy started waking up in the middle of the night to these muffled sounds of violent, abusive arguments. Specifically, it sounded like a man screaming horrific insults at a woman. But remember, the 4 floors below them were totally empty. The sound should have been physically impossible. By week 1, specific rooms in the penthouse started experiencing these crazy freezing temperature drops. And by week 2, the haunting became intimately physical, with terrifying whispers right into the ear of one specific roomie. To really wrap our heads around why this happened, we have to look at a core psychological and spiritual theory presented in the source, the concept of the divine shield. I find this fascinating because it argues that we aren't protected from supernatural attachments by, magical spells, but by our everyday aura. This shield is built by simple things: positive intent, humility, basic human kindness, and just a general acknowledgement of a higher power. Just having a neutral or positive reverence for the universe keeps you safe. But when a person gets totally consumed by arrogance, bitterness, or openly mocks the unknown, that shield completely shatters. And that brings us to Priyanshu. He is definitely the most tragic figure in this entire account. You might be wondering, why did the entity target him first, and why so aggressively? Simply put, his divine shield was completely broken. See, Priyanshi was a cousin of one of the roommates. While the other 3 were these hotshot grads from top-tier institutes, Priyanshu had an average degree and a lower-paying job. And the other 3, they constantly bullied and belittled him for it, breeding this deep, deep inferiority complex. To cope, Priyanshu adopted a fiercely arrogant, intensely negative mindset. He openly mocked the divine, leaning into a really toxic atheism purely out of spite, constantly spitting at the world. He was spiritually bleeding, which made him the absolute perfect prey. The psychological targeting actually kicked off in the common lobby outside their flat. Just imagine this. Priyanshu is fuming after yet another humiliating argument with his so-called friends. He steps out into the quiet lobby just to smoke a cigarette and cool off. He puts it out, standing completely alone in the dead of night. And then, from right behind him, directly into his ear, a female voice softly whispers, "What happened?" He spins around. There's literally nobody there. Just this eerie painting on the wall that suddenly feels way too lifelike. This wasn't just your standard bump in the night. This was a highly calculated, intelligent interaction. Terrified, Priyanshu rushes straight back into his bedroom, slams the lock, and out of sheer panic, just passes out on his bed. But the nightmare was really just getting started. He wakes up and the room is unnaturally freezing, like breath-visible cold. The lights start flickering in this bizarre rhythmic sequence. He can actually feel someone breathing heavily right on the back of his neck. And then, that same voice returns, but this time it's violent, demanding. Hul, hul, open, open. The entity wasn't just outside anymore. It was in the room with him, and it wanted something. Now, he wasn't just hearing things anymore. The source account provides this incredibly chilling, vivid description of what Priyanshu finally saw with his own two eyes. A woman. She had this pale, deathly white face. Her hair was completely matted, tangled, and caked with dried, blackish blood. She was wearing these strange, tattered clothes. We aren't talking about a shadow out of the corner of his eye here. This was a full-blown, undeniable physical manifestation. He knew for a fact his mind wasn't playing tricks on him. But when he desperately tried to warn his friends, he was met with the exact same thing that broke his shield in the first place: pure arrogance. Which leads us to the real climax of this explainer. What exactly happens when pure, unchecked human arrogance meets the undeniable supernatural? Well, the other three friends, instead of showing even a sliver of concern, ruthlessly mocked Priyanshu's terror. They flat out told him he was losing his mind, and then they did the unthinkable. Sitting right there in the living room, feeling completely untouchable in their 14-crore penthouse, they openly challenged the entity. They verbally, out loud, invited any spirits in the room to prove they existed. Yeah. Huge mistake. The retaliation was absolutely instantaneous. Manish, who was definitely the most arrogant of the bunch, demands the ghost proof itself. Instantly, a heavy metallic pendulum sitting on a chest of drawers violently drops to the floor. Bam! Now, any normal person would be running for the door, but Manish, just dripping with ego, mocks it again. He laughs and says it was just the wind. The entity did not like that. It answers back immediately. A Doraemon toy sitting on a shelf doesn't just fall. It is violently hurled right across the room as if thrown by a furious, invisible hand. Their whole wall of denial was instantly shattered. But the true horror hadn't even peaked yet. Later that night, Manish, still trying to act like the tough guy, gets up to grab some water from the kitchen fridge. He takes a sip. He glances up. And his heart just stops. The source describes this in horrifying detail. The entity was hanging upside down from the living room chandelier, and she was making direct, unblinking eye contact with him. As he stood there, completely frozen in sheer terror, she detached and lunged straight toward the floor. That tough guy facade, gone in a second. The friends scrambled to flee the flat in absolute blind terror. But in the chaos, Priyanshu got trapped inside. The others, standing outside the door, heard a sound that would literally haunt them for the rest of their lives. Priyanshu screaming at the top of his lungs, but the voice coming out of his mouth was that of an adult woman. They finally managed to drag him out and spent the entire night just roaming the streets in total shock. When they finally tried to return to pack up at 5 a.m., the elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, and the ghost, which now smelled heavily of rotting flesh, was standing right there. It instantly charged at the elevator doors as they frantically mashed the close button. So, how did they even get into this mess? The answer actually lies in the landlord's dark confession. When they finally confronted him, the landlord admitted he knew everything the whole time. Turns out, the penthouse had been the site of a gruesome murder-suicide, where a husband violently murdered his wife before killing himself. The landlord, driven purely by greed because he wanted to keep renting the flat out, had secretly hired a tantric to cleanse it. But the tantric totally botched the job. He managed to capture the husband's spirit, but utterly failed with the wife, leaving her furious, traumatized spirit trapped in the flat. The landlord's financial greed literally set the trap for these young guys. The aftermath of all this is just deeply, deeply tragic. Remember how Priyanshu's divine shield was completely shattered? Well, the source reveals that the possession ultimately took a fatal toll. The entity completely warped his mind over time. He fell into this tragic delusion, truly believing that he was romantically connected to the ghost and that it was his absolute destiny to save her from her abusive husband in the afterlife. Driven by this supernatural manipulation, combined with his own deep-seated vulnerabilities, Priyanshu ultimately took his own life. And this, honestly, brilliantly illustrates the dark lesson of this source material. The three surviving friends, they're still undergoing intense spiritual healing, constantly haunted by night terrors and the massive guilt of their own arrogance. Because it wasn't just a ghost that killed Priyanshu. It was a deadly combination of his friend's relentless bullying, the landlord's greed, and his own refusal to cultivate a positive intent. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If your aura, your basic human kindness and humility, is actually your only true defense in the dark, how strong is your divine shield today?